to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted to be joined by Danny. We are reacting to the big news, depending on how you see it, that Jake Paul will fight Nate Diaz on August the 5th, I believe, in Dallas, Texas. Danny, it's interesting to get your reaction to this. Obviously, we were potentially expecting Jake Paul to rematch Tommy Fury. That's obviously not going to happen next. He's fighting Nate Diaz, who is obviously a well-known UFC fighter who had a successful career as a UFC fighter, fought Conor McGregor twice. So those are perhaps kind of his most famous fights. But I think you know more about UFC than I do. You know more about Nate Diaz than I do. But interested to get your reaction to this one.
Yeah, as you sort of said off call, these two's names, they've been put together a bit in the past, but I don't think we saw any, because normally when you get news in boxing, when you get an official announcement, you sort of have a fair idea before that it's done. There's some good sources on there, both in the States and over here. But I personally, I spend half my life on Twitter, it feels like, and saw absolutely nothing about this being anywhere near done, unless I missed it. So it came a bit of a surprise to me when I saw the reports this afternoon. But it's a big fight. I would say Nate Diaz is the biggest name worldwide Jake Paul's fought so far, I would say. Obviously, Anderson Silva, a far more glittering MMA career, but Nate Diaz, a much bigger star commercially, in my opinion, than Anderson Silva, certainly than Ben Askren. And Tommy Fury, okay, he's a big name in the UK, but he's only really known in the US for being attached to Jake Paul, really. So it's a big fight. In terms of what sort of level it's at, another question maybe, but it'll sell well, this, I would say.
Yeah. What do you make of Jake Paul going back to fighting UFC fighters? We know obviously he's only fought one actual boxer and lost, and fought Anderson Silva, which you mentioned there, Tyron Woodley, Ben Askren. He's won those fights. Nate Diaz is about to turn 38. He's, as you mentioned off the call there, he's been in a lot of kind of wars in the UFC. Yeah, just what do you think about Tommy Fury's kind of career move then, going back to fighting a UFC fighter?
I think it's smart from Jake Paul, to be honest. I think the more he loses, the more damaging it's going to be to his brand. I think it's commendable that he did take the Tommy Fury fight when there would have been fights of equal pay, if not more, against this Diaz fight could have happened then. A Masvidal fight was linked to other sort of faded UFC fighters. So I think from a business perspective, it's smart. Like boxers of a similar level, you're looking at, if you're trying to get the name value, like you're looking for someone who's like 50 odd, that he would have the same chance of beating as he would Nate Diaz. Either that, you're either sacrificing the name value or you're like far more likely to get beat. I'd make him a pretty clear favourite in this fight. And I'd imagine this is the route he'll stick down. And I think, to be honest, it'll stay on this trajectory and it'll culminate at a Conor McGregor fight at some point. I genuinely do believe that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that when Jake Paul first called out Conor McGregor, which must be 2 years ago now, I think McGregor was still kind of 31, 32, still maybe had things to do in his UFC career. And I think Conor McGregor is more open to that Jake Paul fight when he really doesn't want to do UFC anymore. But I agree with you. I think that fight will happen in the next 18 months, 2 years. I really do.
Yeah.
Just a couple more questions from me, Danny. Do you think that the Tommy Fury story is over now? Obviously, Tommy Fury, look, he won that fight, but a lot of people would say he just about won that fight, got knocked down in the final round. Do you think we'll see that rematch in the future, or do you think that one's over?
Maybe down the line, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. It depends what Tommy Fury wants to do. I know he said that he was treating this as just a one-off easy payday and then he would get back to the traditional route, so to speak. I personally find that quite hard to believe, and that's not a slight on Tommy Fury. As I've said on a couple of calls, why would you go to fight like the English light heavyweight champion, like Dan Aziz, who's the current British champion? Really tough fights, to put it diplomatically, for a lot less money than he can get for. I know the Jake Paul rematch isn't happening now, but like a fight with KSI, he would earn more than the career of a lot of like light heavyweight boxers put together, apart from the absolute elite, if we're being honest. So I can't begrudge him it. Again, I can only speculate as to what he would do if I was in his shoes. That's the route I would go down. There might not be anything that presents itself quite as big as the Jake Paul rematch in the short to medium term future. But even if he fights sort of influencers and people from that crossover boxing space, the likes of me and you haven't heard of, that's not to say they're not still big fights in that world and easy fights for him. So it remains to be seen, but I would imagine that's the route he will go down.
Yeah, I think we could find ourselves in a position where Tommy Fury's kind of half chasing Jake Paul for a rematch, which could just be a bit sad when Jake Paul's kind of got lots of options and Tommy Fury perhaps doesn't moving forward. Final question for me, Danny. Just interested to get your opinion on why this fight isn't happening until August the 5th. Obviously it's mid-April now. It's almost 4 months away. Do you think that's kind of Nate Diaz wanting to get in boxing shape, wanting to kind of train properly for a boxing match? Why do you think the fight isn't for another 4 months?
Yeah, that could definitely be a part of it. I think that quite a few of these Jake Paul fights, I know the Tommy Fury one was announced with quite a quick turnaround, but before that, if memory serves, quite a few have been announced a couple of months in advance. I know this is 3 and a bit months in advance, so it's a sort of extreme case of that. It could be a demand on Diaz's side to as you know, improve his boxing. It could be Jake Paul's wanted the extra time to bounce back from the Tommy Fury defeat. Maybe it could even be just, look, I couldn't be bothered starting training camp yet. Let's push it back a couple of months. I've got things I want to do. He's got other things going on apart from the boxing. It could be an array of things. But it gives obviously more time for the fight to marinate. And I think like the one thing about this, regardless of the quality of the in-ring action, the build-up, like I don't know how much you know about Nate Diaz, the build-up I would say will be very, very entertaining.
Yeah, I think so. I think like the Jake Paul Tommy Fury fight, this one will be hard to avoid, even if you're not really into it. It's also a pay-per-view fight, so expect some wacky things to happen in the build-up in order to kind of sell those pay-per-views. Yeah, as I've said, this is for some people, not for other people. But yeah, I think definitely one to watch out for. Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz, August the 5th in Dallas, Texas. Danny, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem, Thanks.